answer back, right? What would a normal non-Jew, a normal person in that situation probably would say is, give me the meat, I'll eat it, But Rabbi Abba Bar Zaminat has the chutzpah, if you will, to go back and say, if you're going to kill me, that's it. Got nothing to lose, right? I'm not willing to eat the non-kosher meat, even though most likely I probably have. So most likely he could, in theory, right? When he was willing to sacrifice his life for his beliefs, what happened? The non-Jew says, I respect you for your standing strong. So the problem is that we think a lot of times that we have to give up our beliefs because of what other people are thinking. And I said the other night to someone I was learning with, we said, when we look at the extremes on either side, a lot of times the two extremes have a lot more in common with each other than we think, right? Again, whether you agree with it or not, I'm just saying the two extreme sides of any situation usually are much more in common because they're willing to go the whole way. The people in the middle is where the problem is. Now, I'm not going into politics, I'm not going to anything. I'm just saying in general, when you have someone who's so, like they say in Yiddish, for Brent, like they're burnt, they're going hardcore. On either side of the argument, whatever argument it is, they're willing to go all the way, It doesn't make a difference what side they hold. The guy in the middle says, well, we got to start thinking about this and this and this and this. That's the person that usually is the easiest one to convince one way or convince. Because why? They're already showing their card. They're saying it's, So the point is, why do I love this piece so much, even though it's very short? The reason why I love this piece so much is because Mordecai is teaching us a very powerful lesson. Not just because it's about Mordecai, my name, but it says I love this line. This line says, "Ani rotzeh liot Yehudi shalem." That's the line, right? Ve'ini rotzeh li'stachavot lo klal v'ikar. I want to be an absolute Jew, right? Now we can obviously ask the question: is what does it mean to be an absolute Jew? But the point here is that saying is when we're tested in a daily life. And when we go traveling, wherever we are in a situation where we are not necessarily exposed to people who are either less religious than us, not Jewish at all, what do we do to say, I'm going to hold on? Like, do we say, is that kosher? Is there a place I can go that maybe people won't necessarily question what I'm doing? Is there a way for me to explain right? When I went on business trips, I used to go on business trips more, and I don't do it as much. When I go on business trips and I walk around with the kippah, right? So now we go on kippah, people always see you, they ask you a question. I'm just like, well, this is a kosher establishment, so I can eat here. What is kosher? You start explaining. Oh, so does that mean that you can't eat you can't eat burgers and cheese? No, I can't eat burgers and cheese, right? Oh, so we can't go to McDonald's? No, you can't go. Right. So then and then they say, oh, we'll make the same food, but we won't put, the meat on top. I'm like, it's not so simple. Oh, I'll take you to a restaurant and we'll tell the maitre d' that you're kosher. I'm like, okay, let's see what happens with that. And they go to the restaurant and the guy's like, I have no idea what that is. I'm like, I didn't think so we'll figure it out. Whatever, but the point is, and people ask me all the time now, like, oh, we're so sorry, what's going on? One guy last week, 2 weeks ago, when the first hostages came back, these two guys from India that I work with. No, the first, just now, the first round. They called me, I think they texted me on Teams, and they said, Mordecai, you must be thrilled. These guys, the hostages are coming back. I'm like, yeah, from the outside, it looks great. I'm really happy. Honestly, I'm happy that these people came back alive, period, full stop. But I said, and he said, but what's the problem? I said, because we're getting 3 back. We're not getting all of them back. We're playing into their hand. And also, I said, this situation should have never happened. And I'm explaining to them, and I'm like, they're parading them around, this whole thing, and they're like, whoa. They were blown away. They said we only saw the picture of the release, so they thought it was like the biggest thing. I'm like, there's 99, at that time there were like 99 other people stuck, and I don't know we don't know anything about, most of them, we don't know their status, right? I'm like, that's what we have to think about. And he's like, oh, and then every so often someone asks me, so what are you doing for Christmas? I'm like, I don't celebrate Christmas, so I sent them a link to Hanukkah. They're like, oh, okay. But the point is, what can we do as Jews to make sure that people who are around us, whether even our own kids, or our own family, when we're committed, so we go to shul, or we go to keep Shabbos, or we learn something, sit down and learn, people see that statement. They say, okay, I have 5 extra minutes, so yeah, maybe I will be on my phone sometimes, but most of the time I'm learning. And they'd say, oh, someone I once forgot who I heard this from recently. They said, it's great that you go to so many shiurim, but you should also learn at home too. Because your kids don't, the kids see you go up, get out of your house, go to a shir. But that means that every time you want to learn, you have to get up and go, right? That means you're not home. That means Abba or Mommy are not home when they go learn, right? But you should also see that Abba and Mommy can learn at home, and they spend time learning at home, or uncle or whatever it is. They want to see that they were committed to it. So the point is, what can we do to show that we're really Jews, that we're committed to this? Obviously, we should never be put into tests that are so extreme like this. But if we put into this the test, are we willing to go with the extra mile to say? Even around our Arab cousins, like sometimes the Arab cousins really don't mean anything. Like the guy at the gas station, always, he's kind, he's nice. So say thank you, do that extra little thing. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Is it everyone I do too? No, but some guys are scary, I have to admit. But okay, so that was the first one. Now what time is it? Okay, we'll have about 10 more minutes. We'll see if we can. That was a good Torah. We'll try to do. If we don't finish the whole thing now, we probably won't. But let's we'll do Jewish number 1 in Megilat Esther. We'll start with Jewish number 1. Going over why we're starting with Megilat Esther at all. First of all, it's 30 days before the Chag. Second of all, I think Megilat Esther has a lot to teach us. Third of all, I think I happen to like the Zera Shimshon's thought process on the Megillah in general. And most of his Torahs on the Megillah are relatively interesting. Also, one of them, we have to remember that Thursday night, the fast is Thursday night this year, right? Thursday, right? So we Megillah Thursday night, so that's already one night. One week is off, so we're already 3 weeks to Purim. So then you are 3 weeks to Purim. You have to squeeze it into 2 weeks. It's not so easy. So we'll try to do Aleph. Let's do Aleph. So he says. In the first parak of Megillah, it says that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak patach le'pircha l'hai parsha be'acha. So it says that the beginning of Masechet Megillah, like towards Daf Yud or so, a lot of the Rabbanim start opening up. They start talking about the Perushim, or they start talking about the Megillah, and they have like a pasuk that they kind of like open up their explanation about what's going on around the Megillah using a certain pasuk from anywhere in Tanakh. And so Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, he quotes the pasuk in Tehillim that says, Lulei Hashem shaya lanu bekum aleinu Adam v'lo melech adkan. So the Zera Shimshon quotes this one specifically, bekum aleinu Adam. The pasuk says, bekum aleinu Adam. When an Adam, v'lo melech, and he says that when a person, Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak says that the whole story of the Purim story comes about that Hashem saved us from a person, not a king. Adam, lo melech. Okay, so that's how he starts the story. That's how Rabbi Nachman would start this whole explanation about the whole Megillah story, around this idea that thank you Hashem, had it not been for Hashem who saved us from a person, a regular person, not a king, right? Right. So he's just the Perush here. The Hebrew Perush says, "Hitzil HaKadosh Baruch Hu otanu miyedei Haman shaya rak Adam hediot." He was just a simple person. Now he says, "Ma'achid." So the Zera Shimshon asked the question, "Kaseh ma'achid eish lanu b'drashazo v'lo adraba natan lanu makom lakshot ima emet shelo kam ki im Adam ve'ino melech im kein haneh shel hatzala ino kol kach gadol lo shayach lomar lulei Hashem shaya lanu." Right. So he says. What's the question here? The Zera Shimshon says, wait a minute. If it was just a simple person, does that make the nace bigger or smaller? Smaller. Because what? It's just a simple person. It's not like some big royalty guy, some guy who's in charge of 127 countries. It's some simpleton guy. Some Haman or some Joe Schmo on the street who decided to get upset. He says, okay, I'm going to go kill the Jews. But he didn't have the backing. He didn't have the gusto to do anything. What could he really done? So the Zera Shimshon asks a very good question. He says, "Wait a minute. If that's the case, no big deal. Now, what's the big deal?" So he says. Then he says, excuse me. He says then the pasuk doesn't read right because the pasuk in Tehillim says, "Lulei Hashem shaya lanu bekum aleinu Adam," right? And what he says, the whole point is Bekum Aleinu Adam. Adam is a simple person. Then why do we need Hashem to Lulei Hashem? Had it not been for Hashem to come in, we could have, who knows what would have happened? Zera Shimshon says, no, that doesn't make sense. I can't ask that question. I can't ask the question of, I can't make a statement of Hashem was there for us, Hashem really saved us if it was just a simple person. That's the question. So he said, in order to explain this, he says, excuse me, Kedele Taretz Kushazo. I'm sorry that my voice is like this. It's been like this since Sunday, and it's not going away. Kedele Taretz Kushazo Mishum Hachi Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak Haya Potech Megilat Esther V'Pasuk. So he says, in order to explain this, So in order to explain this question, he says that we have to, in order to explain this question, we have to understand that he says B'nei Purim no dalanu beverur shakadosh baruch hu maktim lanu rufuah lamakah. There's a famous idea that Hashem, before He punishes us, He's already come up with a solution to the problem, right? A famous example would be, in the Purim story, it says that Haman weighed a certain amount of shkalim, and the Gemara there says, you were trying to weigh shkalim to kill my sons. We already had chatzi shekel in the midbar already, so their chatzi shekel from then is going to save this shekel. That chatzi shekel that they did is going to save them from this shekel, right? So in other words, the point is that there's a lot of examples. That's just one example. Shalom. So he says that. He says here. So what he says, what do we know about the first letters that Achashverosh wrote? What was the first letter that Achashverosh wrote in the Megillah?
It was Shalom Bayis.
Right.
The Mensch Sholet in the
Okay. Now, if I were a king, and I wanted to send a message to the entire 127 nations, and I say to people, hey, man, take control of your women. Does that do anything? At that time in history, men were in control of the women anyway. There was no chiddush about what he's doing. It wasn't like
that part of the world. As well.
Exactly. I'm saying, like, what was he saying? Was there anything new? Was he saying, like, hey, take control of, he wasn't saying, like, in the next letter he says, okay, Jews need to, all Jews have to bow down, whatever it was. Jews have to bow down to Haman. They have to listen to what Haman says, whatever, the signet ring. Then you could say, okay, that's a good letter. But the point is that he's going to prove. So he said, So he said, so he says here like this. Had Achashverosh not sent the first message, basically what he's saying is that the first message Achashverosh sent undermined his entire kingdom. Because the first letter that he sent was a letter of stupidity. I hate to say that, but it's true. But the truth is, he said nothing special. He said nothing that people didn't know already. Okay, I mean, it just proves like what level Achashverosh was talking about. Like, I don't need a reminder. I don't need a king. I don't need the president of the United States to say respect your wife, right? Like, maybe if this president said it, I'd be impressed. But at the end of the day, like, if the king of the world said to me, make sure to respect your wife, dude, I know that already. That's not news, right? And that's the first thing you're going out with. Like, the first thing I meet Achashverosh, and the first thing I hear him do is send a letter to the men of the world saying, this is what you got to do. That undermines his entire kingdom because his whole reason, like what they say, reason to enter is nothing. What are you doing? You're a simple guy, right? So he says here, right? Because he says, so the Parish here says, he says, so he says, Il Malay Gvot Rishonot, had it not been for the first letter that Achashverosh sent, then of course all the Jews would have been wiped out. But the first letters, all the non-Jews saw the first letter and they're just like, okay, game over. Like, I've got nothing. What, this king's going to tell me what to do? Like, now every other letter that he sends me is worth nothing. So he says, this is what he's proving, the Zera Shimshon is proving, saying is that the first letter that Achashverosh sent was like the beginning of the refuat of the Makkah. Meaning, once Achashverosh sent out that letter, which was obviously sent by Hashem, made him send that letter, then what? All the non-Jews that were willing to go out and kill the Jews have said, I've got that. What, this king? If this king told me to do it, I'm not doing it after what you sent me. It's like sending like a Hallmark card. Hey, wife, thank you. Like, you're not doing me anything. You're not helping me. What are you telling me? So therefore, he says, once they accepted Achashverosh as like an idiot, like as a fool, then every other letter afterwards has nothing, bears no weight. So he says, V'chol shar nisim, afilu anisha yitziat Mitzrayim, lo nadam imenu zeh beveirur. Right? So he said, now he says, let's look at other nisim that happened. Let's look at other nisim. Maybe we can look at, he says, let's find some other nisim. So he says, there's a machloket. Actually, it's a famous. It's a machloket in the Gemara, I believe. But he says here, let's look at Yitziat Mitzrayim. That's a good place to start. So he says, let's look at Yitziat Mitzrayim. He says, even there, we didn't know exactly whether Hashem was magdim the refuah to the Makkah. We don't know whether Hashem. It wasn't obvious to us, right? Even in the Megillah, it's clearly not obvious, right? He's pointing to a case. What he's saying is, let's look at Yitziat Mitzrayim. It wasn't obvious there that every one of the situations that happened to the Jews, there was already like a solution to the problem beforehand. So he says, He goes to the Asara Ma'amarot by the Ma'amar Asara Ma'amarot. It's a sefer based on I don't want to call it Kabalat because it's not really Kabalat per se, but he quotes. He doesn't even. He says that Hashem was obligated to in the Sefer Asara Ma'amarot. It says that Hashem was quote unquote obligated to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim because to redeem a Jew who was being sold as a slave to an idolater. Okay? Now, since the obligation applies only when the Jew was sold by another Jew, so what do we know? Who sold? That's why Hashem set it up that the brothers sold Yosef to the non-Jew, right? To the Mitzri or to the Ishmaelim or whatever. Because if the brothers hadn't done it, then what would have happened? Then Hashem would say, listen, it's a non-Jew bought and took him as an Eved, no big deal. Here it's because a Jew sold a Jew to the thing. So there he's starting to show you that it's already Magdim Refuah L'Makkah. So he's saying Yosef had to be kidnapped by his brothers, so that way it sets up the scene in which then Hashem says, a Jew was kidnapped by his own brothers, sold by his own brothers to a non-Jew. Now I have an obligation to free him. So that's how he's setting it up. Now we're going to stop here because we're just a little bit late. Amen. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, more Megilat Esther.